Okay, so a long time ago in a faraway galaxy, I was going to paint the Falcon with Insignia White, but it's a little bit too creamy. Now, normally what I tend to do is, my usual way of doing this is we take Tamiya's like XF2, which is my standard go-to flat white colour, okay, and we add a little bit of buff to it. But as you can probably see down in here, I've tried a little bit here, which is on and dried and everything within, literally only painted this 2 minutes ago, okay, but it's just not there. It's too yellowy, and I know obviously the lights here aren't the best ones under this particular camera, okay, but we've got the primer all on and the primer all looks fantastic, but we need to get this white right, okay? So what we're going to try is do it back to front. So what we're going to try is make a mix. Over there, we're going to make a mix of XF2 and then mix in some of the actual Insignia White. Normally I actually use a little bit of buff, pop it down into this one, and then we just make a giant batch of it with lacquer thinners, usually self-leveling thinners, and it's probably what we'll end up doing, and away we go. So it's a little bit back to front. So what we're going to do is literally, I've got lots of this white, you see, so we've already got a load in here. What we're going to try is, and again, don't try this totally at home everyone, but we're just going to put in a good dollop of that into this. So this is Hataka lacquer paint going into Tamiya, but they do mix usually very, very well together. So I'm hoping what this will do immediately is knock off the white and just make it a slightly off tone. Now the big thing is, and we've spoken about it a lot with this one, the Falcon is very, very dirty, so getting this white right isn't actually a necessity. As long as you're in the ballpark, you'll be fine, because by the time you actually make it horrible, it will look something completely different. So see, we're just giving that a bit of a wake up and a shake, and actually that looks pretty good. So we've now got an off-white. It's that simple. So that's our ballpark start, okay? So that will do for our mix. I'm quite happy of how that is. So what we'll do is we'll mix separately in some shot glasses just here, 50-50 into this one, and then we're going to start to paint the Falcon as we make our way through. But what I need to do is obviously clear a little bit of space here because it's a big old lump, and then what we'll do is we'll get the cameras all rolling, we'll get the mask on, everything, extractors on, everything else like that, and I'll talk you through it. Okay, so here's our little mix. So good old mix. Now this time we've actually used self-leveling thinners, not the rapid thinners. I know it's going to get confusing with all the different thinners we're using these days, but the idea is this is a flat paint, so I don't want to use a quick drying thinner, because otherwise it's going to get really, really textured, and we don't want it that textured. All right, so there you go, that's our one just there. We're going to tip this into here. So this is a standard 50-50 mix, bordering on maybe a little bit thicker than 50-50 mix. Okay, so you might hear it spit and crackle and complain a little bit, but in some ways it's not so bad, because the first coat we're going to put down is quite thick, and then obviously subsequent coats after that will get thinner with every pass. I'm just going to move the paint out of the way just a little bit. All right, so we get this on. So as always, I'm going to pop on respirator, I'm going to get the actual compressor all going, and everything like that, so we're all good and healthy, and then the extractor's running, and then I'll join you in a second for the commentary. Okay, so thing is, putting down, we're just putting down one solid white coat of paint right the way over. Okay, so the paint mix itself is probably a little bit thicker than what I would normally do. Normally I would sort of have it look quite wet, but what we're trying to do is cover as quickly as possible. So paint mix for this is probably 50-50. Self-leveling thinners itself, so obviously it's going to give us a more smooth, glossy type finish, and as you can see, within a pass it's going down very, very nicely, no real problems at all. And that's the thing, you can thicken the paint up to literally cover more, all right? And that's the beauty about using something like obviously standard acrylics or Tamiya type, you know, paints, things like that, is because you can have them pretty much to any consistency you actually want. Air pressure as well is probably a little bit higher than I normally sort of spray with,
Okay, so for that, you know, we're probably just popping it down. You know, you can probably see just from the environment around you, maybe the extractors can't cope just that thing, purely because there's a lot of paint going down. And the big thing is, it is a large area, okay? The other massive thing is that we've got all these lumps and bumps and all the bits and pieces on here, so we're going to have to come in from it from all the different angles, otherwise we're going to get shadows of primer and things in there. Original as well, the original primer coat is basically a very light grey, which was more by chance than actually of me making it. It's just that the Mr. Primer Surfacer 1000 is very light colour, so again it was giving us the ability to go in there and go right over it. So between both of them it's okay. So straight away we've gone through one colour cup full of paint just to do that area. That just shows how quickly I am putting it down, and to be honest there's not much care or, you know, attention really needed to this, because it is just that thing of right, get it on, get it down, you know, so forth and so on, rather than obviously going around being very precise and trying to get nice colours in. You might notice there on the big flat areas I take my time just a little bit more than I do with the other bits, because in there, yes, you want it to be nice and flat, very straightforward, so forth and so on, as we're working our way through. Unfortunately, because this thing is huge, some of it, like now, unfortunately you can't see it, purely because it's just out of shot. But as you can see, what I'm actually doing is going in between the layers. So we're going around the back of the engine there in between. Obviously we've masked it up so we're all nice and safe. But now it's just a case of right, just working out where to get in. And again, big deliberate coats around the actual cockpit area there, purely because those are going to be nice smooth areas. You know, obviously we're going to be decaling onto this, so we want it to be quite nice. So areas where it's a little bit more smooth, you can see these bigger areas here, you know, we can pop it down, nice good thick coats on there, just so it's all got time to self-level and sort itself out. Where other areas, perhaps there's lots of surface detail, things like that, you can just give it a run right the way over. The big thing is though, you've got to come back from all of these angles. So as you'll notice as I'm spraying it, we're doing one area, then we're going to be going over it from a different angle, purely so we don't get any primer shadows coming through where perhaps we've forgot to go over that area, so forth and so on. It's funny because looking at this now, obviously I'm recording this afterwards, after I've painted it, it looks quite sort of duck egg sort of blue, but actually it wasn't. This is just the lights playing with it. The grey, to be honest with you, is a lot more grey and everything, but you can see that it's supposed to be slightly patchy. I didn't want it to be just solid white, or anything else like that. It is supposed to be an off colour, which is supposed to work with the primer. So the primer is supposed to come through just so we're starting it straight off of the bat to having a warm type of look to it as we're going down through the colours. And luckily as well, this thing dried back very, very nicely, very, very smooth. But as you'll see, we're rotating it, and each time we rotate we go back over to the farther areas as well, just so we can see, you know, perhaps there's a little bit of shadowing that's been caused where the paint isn't laying, just because it's in the shadows. At this point, what I'm actually doing is cleaning the nozzle. I'm putting so much thick paint through this and literally just maximum pull trigger all the way through. We're actually getting some build up around the nozzle cover, or the nozzle guard at the front. So what I've done is I've soaked a little bit of thinners onto a cotton bud with lacquer thinners, retracted the needle all the way back, okay, and then literally we're just rotating it and just basically rolling it in that gap, just to get rid of it. The way I spotted it was there was a couple of spots appearing every now and again, and it's just the build up in there, and literally that is just because there's so much paint being thrown out of this that the actual, you know, the needle nozzle set can't cope with that amount of paint. So it's actually getting build up in the actual nozzle guard itself, okay? So if you ever notice you get speckles and spots, always have a quick look on the actual where the needle, make sure the needle's nice and clear, but also the needle guard itself hasn't got a build up around it, because that can affect the actual spray pattern. So at the moment we're doing around the nose, but also we're spraying back across the entire back of it as well, as I said, to make sure we've got in, as you imagine, around those engine areas down the back, there's so much surface detail that we want to make sure it's covered from every angle, okay? But again, it's supposed to be blotchy, it's supposed to be sort of, you know, quite a worn look to it. And again, take no real notice of the blue, because the blue, it's not that blue, it's more white in colour. I think it's just because it's white, it's reflecting off of my mask and everything, because that is blue. Obviously my respirator gear, I think that's actually where this blueness is coming from. I think it is a little bit of reflection coming through. But again, coming back from these different angles, as we were saying about before, So we're working our way across because we've come from one side, now we're coming from the other, and that will go for the same of right the way over the Falcon, especially in the burger portion, as I call it. Obviously I always imagine the Falcon of being a burger bun, so you've got the patty in the middle, the meat, and then obviously you've got the bread buns on top and bottom making it, so you've got to get in between those, top and bottom as well. So actually that's the point of this. We used literally, I would say, around about, I'm thinking 7mm, and then obviously 50-50 mix, so 14mm of paint to paint this thing. Okay, so basically it was a full up jar of X2 with a squirt of the actual insignia white in there was used for the entire lot. And then obviously don't forget, after you've done this, you've got to go around, we've got to do the gear, we had to do the radome as well, the little radar dish on there, the gun sections, because obviously they're all different, and then obviously for the doors, open and close. So just don't forget all your extra bits as you make your way around with it. And actually, as you can see, as this is drying, it's drying white. Okay, and this is the thing as well, so I'm quite happy now it's beginning to show through. If you look at that engine section, that's more of the colour it really is back there as it starts to dry.
Okay, so halfway through, really happy with that. It is coming together very nicely. We'll see how it dries and all the rest of it before we do the underside. If it's looking good, we'll carry on with the underside. That'll be coat 1, then we're going to have to come right the way over the entire thing again with some mottling and some various things before we get on with the next paint stage. Okay, we're at the spray booth and we've just started on the decaling, or decaling, whichever way you want to put it. It's a massive job. And to be honest with you, it's not the worst job in the world. It's just one of those ones where you need to take your time with it and break it down. It's very easy to get a little bit carried away and you move too quickly, and before you know it, you've got your fingers and you're grabbing it and you've got decals coming off in your hands. I'll show you what I mean. So basically what we've got, you can see down in here, these are all decals being placed on. Now, one thing I'm actually quite a fan of is Bandai's decals. They're very thin, they're very good. Don't be fooled by it and thinking, well, I've got to go around and do all the painting work for it. Bandai supply you with, and you see we've been going around cutting them out, all of the decals for the different colour panels right the way over the Falcon, which is actually a really nice touch, because also the other thing as well, you can see they're fully weathered, so there's lots of chipping, there's lots of distressing in it, so forth and so on. The only thing is, there is literally 300 of them to go on this thing, and some of them are incredibly small, some of them are quite big, but it is one of those things, just getting them all to go in and line up. As we know, there's lots of lumps and bumps all over this thing. The decals usually just lay straight over the top. Then you need to come in with your setting solutions, and that is the thing with this one. I've got down in here some Mr. Mark Neo Setter. I've also got my standard micro set and sole. I've also got some of the Ajima, which is the strongest stuff that I've got, which is lethal for decals because it literally just melts them to the surface and it takes no prisoners whatsoever. But again, I think it's going to need all of these, and certainly a large amount of time, purely because they are such small, they're very fiddly to go in there and so forth and so on. I can see this being a couple of days just in the decaling stage, but the great thing is about that, we haven't got to try and mask up all the complex shapes on here. So it's a little bit of for and against with this one. I know there's some people out there would probably think, no, I'm going to paint it and go right the way through. My point is that actually these decals are very good colour representation of what we need. So you haven't got to try and colour match of what you need to go in here because we got them, but also the distressing. So trying to get the distressing right, and you'd have to use chipping techniques on this one. Again, it's quite difficult because of the areas they're in. Some of them are sort of recessed down, some of them are sitting raised. So in some ways it's easier to let them get on with it. As always, and there is a little tutorial about decaling obviously on the site, we're going to do our usual way. So down in here we have got some of lukewarm water. As I say, put your finger in it and you shouldn't really feel it being hot. If it feels cold, you need to warm it up. If it feels hot, then you need to let it cool down, right? So you're just going to find that balance for it. What I do recently, and it's a little technique that I've picked up, is to give it a few drops of this into the water. So this is the Mr. Mark Setter Neo. Make sure you give it a really good mix because this stuff does separate quite heavily. And then literally all I do is just come along and we just take a few drops. And if you put it in here, it looks quite milky. Okay, and I do 3 or 4 drops in the water, just literally like this. Okay, a couple of brushfuls, Okay, just down into this. So the water goes slightly milky. Now this stuff has obviously got either a mild acid into it or an extra type of like a weak PVA glue in there. But what it does, it actually really grips the decal and helps to secure it down into position. Because it's in the water, it's quite nice. The enzymes are going to break down the decal a little bit, and what's going to happen is it's going to make it just a little bit more softer. It's going to help it to conform a lot to the joints. Obviously you could use micro set, will do exactly the same thing. It's just the micro, this one there, Mr. Hobby stuff, actually works really well. It's like a precursor. So what you could do is brush this down and put it on, but to be honest with you, my paint has been that, to be honest, blow my own trumpet, is that nice. It's very, very smooth. There's no rough texture to this. It's actually almost a polished finish, so very happy with that. So then what we can actually do is decal straight onto it, so I'm not needing to go down and put it down a clear coat right the way over it. If I was to, and I knew you'd ask, I would use this. So this is my latest and greatest type of clear. It's actually Mr. Hobby's Mr. Colour GX100. It's a clear coat. It's very, very thick. You thin it quite a lot. This stuff goes down beautifully. Pretty much over any surface. You can do it with obviously self-leveling thinners if you wanted to. Once it's dry, it is literally as hard as nails. So it's totally brilliant for putting decals over, but also for later on weathering going onto it. And to be honest, we are going to use some of this. We're going to put some of this over this as a thin coat just to make sure these decals are all welded down, because obviously afterwards we're going to be coming in with lots of washes and oils and enamel thinners and all things that actually decals probably don't like. So we are going to need to seal these in. And again, because of all the lumps and bumps over this, you need a good one right the way over it. I don't want to use something like an acrylic, like a Johnson's floor clear over this, because I've got a feeling it's going to fill up some of the textures, and some of the details are very, very fine on this. Right, so a couple of tips for you. When you are tackling something this big, what you can do is what you can probably see from above here. I've actually started to cut out some of these on here, and we've placed them where they're going to go. It's just to basically speed up the bit where you're like, okay, number what goes where. So I've been cutting them up and then laying them on in position of where they're going to go. And the idea is that it'll just speed up my, times of actually putting these in. And then usual way, so we know this one is going to go in up here. So we'll start with this one. We're going to go into a clamp, hold it in position, face down in the water. It will immediately sort of go to roll, but it will relax instantly. We take it out, place it down, and we're just going to wet the area. I haven't done any yet. So normally you have a little wet palette down in here. If you wanted to, you could use like a piece of polythene, or if you wanted to, like I use the back side of this sometimes, place it on here. That way you can see what's going on. If you're using something obviously with white surface, if you've got black decals so they stand out easier, things like that. So we place him down. We're then going to grab this little guy, or actually quite a big guy, okay, because he's a multi-part. So again, face down, let it go, you feel it relax. You can see that the paper is completely covered, okay, and then we'll just place him down as well. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to grab some water, and we're just going to place it down under here. And to be honest, we're making just literally a wet palette. The idea being is that by putting them down upside down, it stops them rolling up and cracking and stuff like that. Then wet your finger, okay, come over to the decal and just give it a slide on the backing paper, and as you can see, it's starting to move, so we know we're getting good there. So then we're going to come up, we're going to pre-soak this area, and because we've already got the actual micro setter in there, we know we haven't got to come in with any more because it's in the water, and as I said, it's a nice smooth surface on here. We shouldn't have any problems with it at all. Okay, so then what we're going to do is pick up our decal, let's pop on, sliding off, okay, and then obviously we've got a little bit to wrap it around the top here, so we just got to try and get it all down. Okay, so we're just going to slide it into position. Okay, it looks like we've got a little bit of carrier just on this top bit. Actually, it'll probably go down just as is, which is fair enough. So that's on there. Then we're going to come in cotton bud. Always wet the cotton bud first. Okay, get it on there, and then I roll it out onto a piece of paper just to so most of it's drawn off. And then obviously doing this slightly cack-handed because I am not left-handed at all. But all we're going to do is absorb some of the
So we've got a bit on here. These are older ones, to be honest. Absorb some of the water to get it out. But then you can probably see we've got a little bit of crinkling on here, and this is because we've got these big squares and everything down underneath it. So we're just going to roll most of it all off out of the way. Okay, just like that. And then to be honest, we're going to use the Ajima stuff because this stuff's brilliant at melting in decals. And then all we're going to do is just going to come along and generally go right the way over everything. Make sure you cover the entire decal. Okay. You can probably see this Ajima stuff is brilliant, but it is lethal because once it's on there, you now can't retouch that. Big thing to remember, if you were to accidentally, I did it on the underside, I'll show you in a minute, but touch it, you will pull it off. It will stick to your finger and that's it, okay? So you do have to be very, very careful with it, okay? So happy with that. That can start to do its bit. And then what we're going to do, we're going to pre-soak the next area, which is this guy around here. And then again, we're just going to come in, going to drag it out, pop them out of the way. And again, we've got various lumps and bumps to contend with. So we've got one just down on here. So again, we don't worry too much about it. Okay, push all of that water out, or roll as much out as you possibly can. You know, technically when I do this with just me, I'll position it so it's all in better angles and everything else. Okay, this guy down the edge here, I don't know how well you can actually see that if we just move this back a little bit, but you might be able to see on this corner we've got one that's rolled up. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab some of the Ajima setting solution and we're just going to pop a bit on the sides, but you can probably see how this is now wrinkling right up. Okay, so this goes right over. I'm happy with all of that, and then this one's going to go over here. And then what we're going to do is just going to lightly go up to the edge, and this will soften, and then it will pull in. Okay, so that's just coming all in. So a nice little nudge, and we'll sit there. Okay, and again, once it's on, leave it. All right, and then what we're going to do now is just going to carry on right the way over the entire model, popping some of these in. So what we're going to do, I'm going to carry on, going to put on a few more onto this one, come back, show you how we are, and then we can tackle some of the problems of how to get it to bed in around some perhaps of the shapes where it doesn't want to. So if you've got a square under there, it forms a tent, how we can actually make tiny little holes, get the film underneath it, get it to soften and conform around all of those. Again, this could take 2 or 3 days, so bear with me on this one. It's a big old job on this one. It's one of those ones which really you can't rush. You just sort of do them in sections as you make your way along. But again, take your time with it. There's no rush to it. Okay, enjoy it. Put on some music, put on a film, whatever you want to do, and enjoy the entire process. So I'm going to crack on with this one. We'll come back and see about getting those troublesome decals to lay flat. Okay, we are getting there slowly. As I said, it is a massive, massive job on this particular one. So what we're doing at the moment is I've gone round and got majority of just all the big ones in place. Okay, the little tiny ones, I'll be running around with them afterwards, but for the moment we want these to go down. And to be honest, they have been going down pretty well, no problem at all. But we have got some few little areas. A good point of reference is this little guy here. Let's try and show you on the close-up. You can probably see it's got like a bubble on the top of it, and it's not looking particularly nice. Now, you know, you might be tempted to come in here with a knife. The trouble is, if you come in with a knife, it will physically just split it. It is under tension now because it's shrunk, it's pulled, so forth and so on. So what we need to do is slowly release that. So what I would say is come in with some of the setting solution, okay? Cover the entire decal again, because obviously it's just going to give it another go. Then take if you got one, a riveting wheel like this, and then all we're going to do is we're just going to run around over them, but do it once you've had the solution on. Because the thing is, as I said, if you do it afterwards, it can suddenly pull and rip. Now, the thing is, what this enabled them to do is basically the fluid to get underneath it, but also to perhaps leave some little bit of the pressure, so forth and so on. A lot of it is just air that is trapped underneath. It physically can't get out of the way. And as it shrinks, it turns into a bubble. And you can probably see now it's all collapsing down, and it should be absolutely fine. So with a second run at this, we should be good to go. And to be honest with you, there is a few other little places on this. We're just going to move that completely out of the way. Okay, so as we're sort of making our way around underneath here, I don't know how well you can see it, but we got another one up here. So that is just there. So again, what we're going to do, we're just going to come in with some of the agent. We've got a little bit just on this one as well. So just gonna cover the entire thing, because what this will do, it will soften it slightly. To be honest, it's not too bad. I've got a bubble just over here, so we're just going to pop a little bit on there. Okay, and then again, we're just going to take our wheel, and we're just going to have a little run over it. Because what's happening is because it's soft, it's allowing this to go through. Okay, and by using a wheel, it's enough just to pierce the actual film itself to release the air, and that's normally what this actually is. But generally, the rest of them are going down on here. I have already done this one under here. You probably see on the closer, and around you can see just on the edges, it's got a few of them as well. So what we'll do is we're just going to run around this one again. Okay, so we just pop that down like that, and then again we're just going to come in. Okay, just running over some of these, just a little bit closer. But the point of using a wheel is it's going to make less damage, and if you was to use a knife, obviously a blade, cut it, it will just pull it apart and you're left with a gap. Now, to be honest with you, on this it's not so bad, because let's face it, it's all distressed. It's going to get covered in oils and obviously with weathering and clays and everything under this one. So if you were to have a bit of a thing of a split decal, I don't think anyone's going to see it at all. Okay, so I don't think necessarily that's going to be a problem with it. But as you can see, this is the underside. All the major ones are done now under here. So what we're going to start doing is literally popping around all of these with these tiny little ones all over it. And there is some quite interesting ones under here. If you can see, this little guy here is actually, in my look anyway, it looks like it is a 1/72 cockpit for a F-104 Starfighter decal. And that, of all places, just sits in plain view just in here. Incredible how they are. So even the decals are from other things as well, which I think is a fascinating touch with this particular one. So I'm going to carry on with the decaling on this one. As you can probably see in here, hopefully we catch it a little bit in the light. There we go. You see this one on the close up there? It's looking a bit of a mess, but hopefully it will all settle down, it will all pull in and go. Remember, the thing is, there's no easy, quick way to making decals go down. There's no magic bullet. If you use a very hot product, and this is probably as hottest as I ever want to get, you run the risk of them melting. If they melt, they just don't look right. Okay, you get other ones and they go down, and you get big air pockets and they don't really conform and they don't stretch. And that's the thing, you need them to sort of physically stretch over the items. Okay, and I know there's people out there who have tried various things, and I must admit I have tried them in the past. Hairdryer, hot setting and melting decals. I've then known them just to bubble and blister, and they just go horrible, and it's a very fine line to get that right one. What I think the best thing you can do is patience. Literally come along with the setting solutions afterwards. So your micro sole, and then obviously if you've got some of the Ajima stuff as well, just brush it on, leave it, forget about it, put it off to one side, come back an hour later, have a look. If you think it needs another one, go again. And you just generally slowly build it up, and each time getting it to conform, to soften, just to go around that item a bit better. Because the moment you start to try and force it, trying to pull it, and you cut it, you either tear it, split it, or ruin it, and it just doesn't give you the right effect. But a little bit of patience, you should be absolutely fine. So anyway, I'm going to carry on now, probably for all day tomorrow, get this thing all done. Once it's done, we'll come together. We're going to give it a very thin coat of a clear coat right the way over, just to seal all these decals in and to protect them, and then we can get on with the weathering.